It was too much for me to think of losing the bakery, my entire ambition. So I did what any insane person would do. I began to bring the lemon tree with me. We went out to eat. Evelyn sat across from me in the front row. I heard people whispering. It took everything in me to keep my mouth shut, to refrain from yelling at them. But I knew I couldn't do it. I had to put on a happy face. So I stroked the leaves. I wanted to drive into traffic. I mean, truly. I would have probably done so if a semi-vehicle had arrived. I carried him around with me. I could see the small black automobile following me the whole time. I even went to a plant store to get the plant some pricey exotic fertilizer. Maybe if I bought him some trash, they wouldn't notice how phony I was. It appeared to be functioning. Everyone in town obviously thought I was mad, but at least I'd be able to retain my millions. That is, until the cars began to arrive in greater numbers. I realized I couldn't go on living this way. Even running to the supermarket meant being followed. Even in my own house, I couldn't wander around naked. So I made the decision to put a stop to it. I needed to make everyone think I was insane. I needed to demonstrate that my love was genuine. As a result, I did the unthinkable. I had a real wedding. As I walked down the aisle on the finest day of my life, I could feel hundreds of eyes on me. Yes, that's correct. Hundreds. My grandma and the rest of my family were glaring up at me with disgust in the front row. As if I wasn't already disgusted with myself. I wasn't looking forward to being up there. I could hear the snickers behind me as I stepped up to the altar. My face was flushed with blazing crimson. As the preacher began to speak our vows, I glanced at the silly plant, my mind racing. Could I actually pull this off? What else was I going to do if I followed through with it? Do you have any plant babies? Should I bring the plant to every holiday gathering for the rest of my life? When the pastor asked if I believe in God, I said that I do. I began to perspire. The room began to swirl. I had no choice. I had made a decision. As a result, I knelt. I kissed the plant on the cheek. I've experienced awful kisses before, but this time, tears welled up in my eyes. Those dreams where folks are naked in class? Consider it on steroids. My mother and grandma cornered me at the after party. They were dissatisfied, to say the least. My mother was sobbing uncontrollably. You know how bad it feels to make your mother cry. I felt like a mix of the Joker, Lex Luthor, and Thanos. She told me that my grief had caused the family to be embarrassed. She was out the door with that. I assumed it was misogyny on the part of my grandmother. The car stopped following me after that. I could go shopping. No one would notice if I danced about my house, letting it all hang out. I put my husband in the closet and resumed my old life. With one major exception, my family did not contact me. They didn't say anything to me. You know how you feel when your mother rejects your calls? What if your grandmother rejects your calls? What was so essential that they couldn't speak to me? Every time I reached out, someone shut me down. If I was ever going to be able to communicate with my family again, I knew I had to do the 5 billionth inconceivable thing in the last few months. I had no choice except to murder my husband. I had to stage it to look like an accident. I didn't need rubber gloves or bleach. I felt as if I were on a hidden operation. I pretended to be a plant-killing spy or hitman when, in truth, I was a moron. So I walked Evelyn to my grandmother's place. I held him in my arms one last time. My leafy, barky, tree, non-phallic hubby was on his way out. I rang the doorbell as I approached my grandmother's house. Everything moved at a glacial pace. They placed Evelyn on the railing. Splat! When the door opened, crash, kaboom. The plant has been permanently destroyed. An incoming truck ran over him after he hit the ground and then the road. Chlorophyll guts are leaking everywhere. It was like a vegetarian horror film. It was showtime when my grandmother observed the spectacle. I sobbed like I'd cut my toe with a knife. I created a waterfall with my mascara. You could have discovered Nemo in the sea of tears I was shedding. It was an Oscar-worthy performance, I must say. My grandmother cradled me in her arms and comforted me. Bingo. I'd made it. So that's the end of it, right? The husband is dead, money is in the bank, and a bakery is on its way. No. What could be more suspicious than marrying a tree? You are not attending your husband's funeral. So there was a funeral. For the sake of the tree, my loved ones consoled me. As I wiped the silly crocodile tears from my eyes, they apologized for excluding me. I was genuinely standing in front of a casket containing an effing plant. I paid for a framed stock photo of a plant that was next to a casket. In addition, I had to choose a song for the funeral. I was required to give a speech. Evelyn was my partner, my roots, my branches, and my affection, according to the speech. As I have stated, it is Oscar-worthy, right? My grandmother drove me home after the funeral. She apologized for everything and welcomed me back into the family. Now that I was back to my normal life, I believe she meant that I wasn't some maniac married to a plant, because that whole period of my life was a shambles. People called me names, laughed at me, and refused to invite me to events for months, but it was all worth it. My bakery is doing quite well. My grandmother is still a little insane, which makes me pleased. Hello, my name is Layla. I grew up with the best parents a child could ever have. In my mind, my parents were always my big brother and sister. Everything was fine until it all came crashing down. As a teen, I was so outgoing that I didn't take no for an answer. My parents gave me everything I asked for, but I was never pleased for some reason, and I continued feeling unsatisfied. That's why I kept requesting more. I had a tremendous disagreement with my father on the eve of my 15th birthday about whether or not I should go out. When things grew hot, I told him I didn't like how he treated me and stormed into my room, and I slammed the door so hard that the house resonated with my rage. After a while, I heard a big bang coming from my parents' room, which made me nervous. I walked inside the room, my rage slipping into my fingers, and opened the door. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. I noticed my father on the floor. My heart dropped. Mom was frantically jerking him and running to call the neighbors. Either it happened too quickly or the tears and trauma that haunted my head clouded my images. Is it possible that I had something to do with it? Months have passed since Dad died after a heart attack. My first actual taste of the stinging whip of life. We were able to get things back on track. Mom was working 2 or 3 jobs at the time. I honestly don't know. After Dad's death, I see her most nights, weary and passed out on the couch. I was completely out of sorts. Consider the narcissistic adolescent who has recently lost her father. I felt completely isolated from everything and everyone. I was furious at myself and everyone I knew. Most of the time, I was irritated with my mother. She was always too busy for me. She constantly stated she had to work, and although she worked full-time, she hardly gave me enough money. When I told my mother that I wanted to learn piano with my friends, she said she'd register me at a nearby venue. That was a truly awful place. It was overly public, which I despised. I desired private instruction. My mother, on the other hand, refused, claiming that private lessons were prohibitively expensive. I was furious with her since I knew she could afford it. If Dad had been present, he would have agreed to pay for the classes. I stormed out before tears welled up in my mother's eyes. I began piano lessons the following week. It felt fantastic, although Mom was usually not around on Saturdays. Despite allowing me to receive individual lessons, I still had difficulty convincing my mother to pay for things. She was continually pressuring me to buy whatever was on sale, which I despised. Like my buddies, I wanted the best pieces, but she was a nasty jerk. Things had gotten out of hand after a few weeks. My friends and I were looking forward to the largest concert of the year, and then it arrived. My mother and her uncanny ability to wreck things. She went on and on about how much she spent on me and how she couldn't afford a concert ticket. After days of bickering, it was clear that she had no intention of buying me the ticket, and I was running out of time. I wasn't about to accept no for an answer. So the night before the concert, I slipped into my mother's room when she was sleeping, grabbed $100 from her wallet, and purchased the ticket the next day. I told Mom I was going to Melissa's for the night, and then I went to the concert with my pals. It was fantastic. Mom had no idea what I was up to, and I'm sure she didn't realize the money had vanished. It has since become my new way of doing things. I crept in after Mom had fallen asleep, grabbed some money for her wallet, and exited the room. It was fantastic for a while, until I couldn't find any money in her wallet any longer. It simply had cards and a few coins in it. I wasn't sure what she meant. I assumed she was suspicious that I was stealing from her. She must have hidden it elsewhere. I waited for my mother to leave for work and then went to her room to seek money. When I opened her closet, the first thing I noticed was how worn her clothing was. I couldn't help but notice that I had far nicer clothes than my mother, which felt odd. I never gave it much attention, but I never saw my mother buy anything for herself. But it's not possible. She worked 2 jobs, and we were the only ones in the house. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my mother was going to great lengths to keep me happy. In exchange, I stole her money. I was in a bad mood. I had around 160 hidden in my room and was eager to return them to her. I took the money and left the house to meet her at her workplace. She was working in a nearby cafe, which I never visited. I walked up and spotted my mother through the glass doors. She appeared exhausted and worried. When I walked in, she was talking to the owner, and I stood behind her until she finished. I couldn't help but overhear what they were discussing. My mother was requesting a loan from the owner, which she planned to repay later, but the owner refused. I overheard him mention that she is always late returning his money and that her paycheck cannot cover it all. Oh my God, what I was hearing was unbelievable. What happened to my mother? At the time, I felt like the most selfish being on the planet. Before they ended, I rushed up to my mother, hugged her, and cried without saying anything. She was astonished to see me, but she nevertheless hugged me. Then we got down to discuss. As I was drowning in tears, I told her everything I had done, apologized, and returned the money I had taken from her. Mom looked stunned, and I expected her to explode in my face, but she didn't. Instead, she stated that she had excused me for the things I was doing all this time because she understood how much my father's death had affected me. She didn't know how she could assist me in getting over it, and money appeared to be the only thing that made me happy. I promised her that I would stop being so selfish and would try to help her as much as possible. I told her how much I appreciate everything she does for me. She hugged me and expressed her desire for me to be happy and attentive. I pledged to be one.